Happy Halloween. I'm really hoping that nothing too scary happens with our bets this weekend, and I'm sure it won't, because we're on fire at the moment in the live betting group. We made 7 units of profit last month, and we continue to make a profit on 68% of UFC events. Not only that, but as you can see from this profitability chart, we make a profit on 73% of months, which means if you're in the live betting group, you're making a profit almost every single month of the year, and the membership easily pays for itself. So we're on fire, and we're getting very close, as you can see on the profit chart, to breaking through the 600 unit lifetime profit mark over the last 10 years. So there's only 2 months left in 2025. We've only got November and December left, and currently you can see we're about 11 units, 10.5 units off breaking through the 600 unit profit mark. So I'm going to be going hard in the live betting group in November and December to try and break through that 600 unit psychological barrier, and then hopefully we can have an even bigger 2026. I'm very confident we can do it. Like I said, we made 7 units of profit in October alone, so if we keep pushing, we can smash through 600 units and finish the year really strong. So if you're not in my live betting group, ask yourself why not. It's crazy. It pays for itself. You'll absolutely love it. Give it a try. Check it out, link in the description below. We're going to kick things off by taking a deep dive into the main event of this weekend's card. It's a brilliant main event between Steve Garcia and David Onama. This is a great fight, great matchmaking. Both guys are in the even money odds range, and very much looking forward to seeing how this one plays out. I'm very tempted to bet Steve Garcia this weekend, but there are some major red flags with him, which I'm going to show you in this breakdown, which do add quite a big element of risk to betting Garcia. So once you've watched the footage that I'm going to show you in this breakdown, I'd really appreciate it if you would come to the chat room or leave a comment below if you're watching on YouTube and let me know what you think. Do you think Garcia's worth a bet or not? I'm pretty sure Onama's not worth a bet. For me, this is Garcia or pass. But we're going to take a deep dive into this one, and like I say, let me know what you think in either the chat room or on the forum or in the comments below if you're watching on YouTube. So let's dive into it. So Garcia is a 1.74 favourite, which is going to be minus 135 for an implied probability of 57%. And we can see Onama 2.10 underdog, which is plus 110 for an implied probability of 47%. So if we bring up the fighter comparison tool, we can see both guys are about the same age. They're about the same size, same reach, same leg reach. Garcia is a southpaw, which is probably one of the reasons why a lot of guys find him quite tricky. But in terms of the striking stats, they're also quite even. Both of them tend to land about the same number of strikes per minute. They're both about the same when it comes to accuracy. The stats comparison only shows that Garcia is 6% better defensively. But when you actually watch footage of both these guys, Garcia, from my perspective, is a lot better defensively than Onama. And I'll explain why when we break down how these two match up when it comes to striking. When it comes to grappling, the stats are a little bit misleading on this one, which is why stats are really useful, and this is a great tool for giving us an even bigger edge over the betting sites to make even more money than we already do. However, stats are only as useful as they are interpreted, and if they're not interpreted correctly, it can get you into a little bit of trouble. Steve Garcia's takedown defense of 89% is very misleading because his takedown defense is actually pretty bad, and I will show you a little bit of footage so you can see what I mean. I do think that Garcia could be in a lot of trouble in this fight if Onama chooses to grapple, and that's really what I'm going to show you footage of. In terms of the strike distribution chart, both guys pretty even. Neither of them bother going to the body or the head very much. The vast majority of their strikes, as you can see, 85% each, land to the head. So how do these two match up from a stylistic point of view? Well, obviously they're both primarily strikers, but in the context of this matchup, I'm treating this as more of a striker versus grappler matchup because I think Steve Garcia has got a very big advantage when it comes to striking, and I think David Onama has got a very big advantage when it comes to grappling. Now that might come as a surprise to some of you watching this because Onama's grappling is very bad, but the thing about Steve Garcia is Garcia's grappling is so spectacularly bad that almost anyone in the division is going to have an edge over him on the ground. And so for me, how this fight plays out is really going to come down to how much grappling Onama uses in this one, because if it stays standing, I think Garcia is going to light him up, and I think Onama is probably going to get brutally knocked out. So this fight is going to hinge on the grappling side of things. So we'll quickly go over how they match up when it comes to striking, and then we'll focus on the meat and potatoes of this stylistic clash, which is the grappling, and we'll show you some footage so that you can understand and see for yourself why this fight will most likely be decided by grappling. So in terms of how they match up when it comes to striking, there's no doubt that Garcia is the more technical striker out of the two. The fight against Calvin Kattar was a masterclass. In the past, we've seen Garcia look reckless, and we've seen him look a little bit sloppy at times, where he would just kind of come out the gate early, play rock'em sock'em robots with his opponents and try and kill everyone in the first round. Against Kattar, he took a very measured approach. He used great footwork, great movement. He controlled the distance very well. His ability to read Calvin Kattar was impeccable. He avoided those big crazy exchanges we've seen from him in the past, and he was just an absolute technician that just managed the distance and just chipped away at Calvin Kattar with superior technique, which isn't an easy thing to do because Calvin Kattar is a pretty good boxer. David Onama is a reasonably good striker, but he's not the best at reading his opponents. So you'll often see David Onama get caught clean and hard with shots that he really doesn't see coming. And you know what they say, the shots that knock you out are the ones you don't see coming. And so the real difference between these two for me on the feet is Garcia's sharpness, his defense, his reflexes, his ability to read his opponents. It's all 30 to 40% better than Onama. And all those little edges in striking add up and they compound to just giving Garcia a pretty big sizable advantage when it comes to striking. Onama's very aggressive in coming forward, but he does eat a lot of big counters as a result. And I think if this fight stays standing, the most likely outcome is Garcia by knockout. It's possible Onama catches him with something big, flash KOs him. We know Garcia at times likes to stand and bang, but from a technical point of view, Garcia's advantages when it comes to striking are pretty huge. And that's why I'm very tempted to bet him in the even money odds range, because both these guys are primarily strikers, and in a stand-up fight, I heavily favour Steve Garcia. Heavily favour Steve Garcia. So if Onama wants to win this fight outside of just a random flash knockout, in my opinion, he needs to use a grappling heavy game plan. Now, if you're watching this, you're probably thinking, well, I'm going to go bet Garcia because Onama's not a grappler, and surely Garcia is good enough to stop Onama from using grappling to win. So I'm going to show you some footage. Before you rush to your betting site to bet Garcia, wait until you see the footage I show you, because it may have you thinking more deeply about this fight and perhaps struggling to pull the trigger on Garcia as much as I am right now. So let's dive into it. So it is true that Onama is a guy that is primarily a striker, but when you look at his past fights, he does also grapple quite a lot. And if we look at the granular statistics for each of these matchups, you can see that he shot 6 takedowns against Garrett Armfield, 6 against Nate Landwehr, 3 against Roberto Romero, and 3 against Giga Chikadze. And so there are some fights where he doesn't bother grappling and he chooses to keep it standing. But generally speaking, you're going to get an average of 3 to 6 takedown attempts from David Onama in a fight. He's quite active at pursuing the takedown, and these stats tell a clear story behind that. And so even though we all have this perception of David Onama being a grappler, being a striker, he's actually more of a well-rounded fighter. Now, when you look at Steve Garcia, there's no way to really sugarcoat the fact that his takedown and ground game is an absolute joke. It's extremely bad. I would expect to see better MMA grappling between 2 teenage girls fighting in the playground in school. Like, it's horrendous. I don't know how a guy that is trained at a super gym like Jackson Wink for so many years, that has produced so many high-level MMA fighters, could have MMA grappling as bad as Garcia. I mean, you know, obviously we've got guys like Maurice Green that have trained at Jackson Wink for a long time and have been equally hopeless. But obviously he's lanky and long and tall, and there's reasons why his ground game would be so bad. With Garcia, it just doesn't make sense. He's had 23 pro fights, which is a lot of fights. It's a lot of experience. Yet his ground game is abysmal. It's shockingly bad. And so even though David Onama's offensive wrestling is also very bad, when you're as bad on the ground as Garcia is, it doesn't really matter how bad your opponent's grappling is, because it doesn't take much to cause you big problems. So what we're going to do is we are going to show a couple of fights of Steve Garcia's so that you can see for yourself the issues with his ground game. Now, the irony of the fights that I'm going to show you is that he won both of them. But GSP famously said that fighting was 90% mental, and a big mistake Garcia makes from a strategic game planning point of view is that he is way too accepting of bad positions on the ground, and he gives his opponents way too much time to score points and run the clock down with grappling control. And above all else, he doesn't really make his opponents work very hard in grappling positions either. He just accepts being in bad positions, which is an issue in this fight, because one edge that Garcia does have over Onama is that Garcia's cardio is better than Onama's. We've seen Onama slow in fights against guys like Nate Landwehr. He also slowed against Jonathan Pierce. To some extent, he slowed against Chikadze as well, although not as much. Garcia's cardio looks very good. Obviously, we haven't seen him go the distance a whole lot. He's guilty of, so many quick finishes with how deadly he is early. But his cardio looked absolutely fantastic against Calvin Kattar. And he threw a really high volume of strikes, 250 strikes without slowing down. Very, very impressive. And so, if we go into this fight now against Carl Nelson. So this was from, September 2024. So about a year ago, almost exactly a year ago. So it's possible that at the age of 33, Garcia could have improved since this Carl Nelson fight. But at 33 years old at the same time, after 23 pro fights, the way I would look at this is, if Garcia's takedown offense and ground game is still this bad at 33 years old after having 23 pro fights, is it ever going to improve? Some guys, for whatever reason, do just go their whole careers without, improving that much on the ground. Maybe Garcia is one of those guys, which would be a shame because his striking is top tier. So we're going to hit play now, and you're going to see some of the issues that I have with Garcia in this fight. So here we go. Here we go. So very early on, this fight ends up going to the ground. Very, very early on, you can see Garcia kind of falls over throwing a kick. Now, from this position, Garcia's not in a particularly bad position here. He's been taken down, or he's ended up on the ground close to the cage. He's already on his knees. He's got his left side tight to the cage. And whilst Nelson does have control of the body, Garcia's in a really good position here to get his back tight to the cage, to start the wall walk back up to his feet and turn into Nelson and defend this position. But the red flags begin literally just 13 seconds into the first round, into the fight, because he hesitates and does nothing. And this enables Nelson to start working to take the back. You can see him start working to try and sneak a hook in here. And then here you can see some of the issues with Garcia's ground game start to unravel. So we've already said Garcia's in a relatively good position here, as good of a position as you could be when taken down, because he's already on his knees, he's already got his left side tight to the cage. What Garcia needs to do in this position, if he understands MMA grappling, is keep his left side pressed up against the cage, super tight to the cage, so he can start to get his back tighter and tighter to the cage, which will protect him from having his back taken, and he can also then use the cage as leverage to wall walk back up to his feet. Garcia needs to stay tight to the cage. He needs to avoid moving away from the cage. And what does he do? You can see he kind of tries to turn into Nelson, and he enables Nelson to drag him away from the cage, which now means Nelson has created a barrier between Garcia and the cage. which means the position that Garcia now finds himself in is hundreds of % worse than the position he was in 3 seconds ago, because now he can't use the cage to defend his back or the cage to wall walk back up to his feet. Even though in terms of distance he's still relatively close to the cage wall, the fact that Nelson has created a barrier between the cage wall and Garcia means this is a horrendous position for Garcia to be in. And the reason why he's in this position is poor decision making. He didn't fight hard enough to keep his left side tight to the cage, which would have prevented this. But you think, okay, no problem. We're only 22 seconds into the fight. Garcia's got a lot of time to work here, right? He needs to show urgency, to pivot and explode into top position. So when the camera changes in a moment, you're going to see the strength of this back control position for Nelson. So we can see it here. We'll get a better camera angle in a moment. But here you can see Nelson doesn't have a whole lot, to be honest with you. He does have wrist control on the left side. But you can see because Nelson's not the tallest guy, certainly not that much taller than Garcia, he doesn't have particularly deep hooks here. And he doesn't have a body triangle in play either. So Garcia's in a really strong position to be able to pivot to his left and explode into top position. Nelson doesn't really have anything here, if I'm honest with you, 35 seconds into round 1. So when you have a situation where you've had your back taken, your opponent's on your back, and they've got 2 hooks in, what you want to do is get out of this position as soon as possible, because the more time you give to your opponent to think, the more chance there is they can make an adjustment to put you in an even worse position. So what I mean by that is 35 seconds into round 1, Garcia's got his back taken from Nelson, but Nelson doesn't have anything here really. I mean, look at how weak, these hooks just aren't strong. You can see his left ankle there. You know, it's kind of resting on the top of Garcia's thigh. So Nelson doesn't have particularly good control with his legs. And if Garcia really starts to commit and really starts to explode to his left, he can pivot into top position. But the longer Garcia waits to do that, the more thinking time Nelson has, which means Nelson can then start to thread in deeper hooks or go to the body triangle, which then makes it far more difficult for Garcia to pivot and explode into top position. This is all about urgency. Garcia needs urgency in this position. You cannot hesitate in this position. So what do we get from Garcia? We get teenage girl level MMA grappling, and it's fucking totally clueless, doesn't know what he's doing. Nelson starts attacking the neck, and Garcia really doesn't make any attempt to pivot into top position at all. And you can kind of see it here. Like, look at how weak these hooks are for Nelson. I mean, they're not even threaded in the thighs of Garcia. They're just resting on the top of the thighs. Nelson has virtually nothing here. And now look, I'm not saying it's going to be easy for Garcia to explode into top position, because Nelson still has wrist control. You know, he has a hold of the arms. But if you start exploding to your left, because Nelson doesn't have control of your body, because these hooks are so weak, you stand a great chance of winding up in top position. I mean, look at this. Nelson now has no hook here and doesn't have particularly strong control of the wrist either. Garcia should be showing urgency to explode out of this position, but now he's been in this position for 25 seconds and he's just lying on his back doing absolutely nothing. So we're going to skip through. We don't want to make this breakdown super long, so we will just skip through, and you can see still Nelson has nothing. Nelson has nothing. So Garcia has been in this position, right? Look at the fight clock, right? We started to fast forward at about 4 minutes 25. So he's been in this position for a whole minute, right? We just go back 1 frame. Still, 55 seconds in this position. He's made no attempt to pivot into top position. You can see Nelson still has these weak hooks in play. And so what happens? Because Garcia has given Nelson a full minute of thinking time, Nelson suddenly realized, hang on, my control of the body is pretty shit. I need to fix that. So what does he do? Goes the body triangle. Check it out. Bang. Body triangle locked in. Not particularly tight, but the body triangle has enabled Nelson to get deeper hooks in play now. And you can see, look at Garcia's face. He knows he fucks up. Watch. Pokes his tongue out with the camera. He knows he's fucking up. He knows that he made a mistake by allowing Nelson to make that adjustment. But still, these hooks aren't that deep. And still, we're not seeing Garcia fully commit to pivoting into top position. Now he starts to turn into his right, but he's not committing. In these positions, you've really got to commit. So we'll continue to go. Again, loose hooks. Loose hooks. So at this point, he's been in this position for about 1:40 seconds. Right? 1:40 seconds. And then finally, the very first time he explodes, what have we been saying this whole time he needs to do? He needs to explode to his left, right? He actually exploded to his right, but the left would have been easier earlier in this position. Either way, the very first time he commits to exploding into top position, he does it easily. Why? Because Nelson didn't have control of the body. These hooks are really loose, and so Garcia gets into top position really quickly, really easily. But my question is, why did he wait 1:40 seconds to do that? Why did he wait 1:40 seconds? The problem with being that complacent and that bad on the ground is that when you face better grapplers than Nelson, higher level grapplers, they're not going to wait 1:20 seconds, 1:30 seconds before going to that body triangle. They're going to go to that body triangle within 3 or 4 seconds. So you need to be thinking about starting to pivot into top position as soon as they get you back, within 1 to 2 seconds, because you don't want to give them thinking time to put you in an even worse position and lock that body triangle up. So in this position here against Nelson, Garcia showed very, very bad fight IQ and very bad MMA grappling. Now, he goes Super Saiyan and just fucking smashes Nelson and gets him out of there. Shortly after, with ground and pound, Nelson kind of waves the white flag and rolls over and plays dead. It is what it is. Garcia got the win. Happy days. Do you know what I mean? A bit of green on his record and everything is awesome. But it was a pretty shit performance from Garcia, and for most of that first round he made catastrophic mistakes on the ground. But it doesn't just stop there. The theme of issues with Steve Garcia's ground game continue through all his fights that actually go to the ground. Here's another fight which he ends up winning, but at the same time he ends up demonstrating really, really big issues on the ground. So we will show you what mistakes he makes here. So I'm not going to go into as much detail with kind of breaking down what's happening in this fight, because this breakdown video will just end up being super long. But what I'm going to do is kind of skip through the footage to highlight that this is a recurring issue from Garcia and not something that you would really expect from a guy with over 20 pro fights at the age of 33. You'd expect him to know a lot better than this. So similar to the Nelson fight, very early on they go to a grappling position. Costa ties him up, puts him up against the cage, starts working for the back. Now, to be fair to Garcia, he does do a good job of keeping this fight standing, and he does do a good job of defending his back. But you see the same behaviour from Garcia in this first round that we saw from him in the first round against Carl Nelson, where he just hesitates in a bad position and spends way too long working out of it. So if you keep an eye on the fight clock, you can see there's 4 minutes 39 seconds. And so if we hit play, we're just going to skip through, and you can see we're now on 3 minutes 39 seconds. So Garcia has allowed Costa to just ride him from back control for a whole minute and really make not much effort to escape this position. If we keep going, he's now been in this position for a full 2 minutes, just allowing Costa to hug him from back control. This is not Makhachev, this is not Khabib, this is Malquiz Costa. Garcia could be doing a lot more to work through this position. Could be fighting harder to get his back tight to the cage. Could be fighting harder to turn into Costa. Could be fighting harder to break Costa's grip. Sorry if you hear a bit of background noise with the dogs. It's Halloween, so we got trick-or-treaters walking past the house, which spooks them a little. So if we carry on going, so he's been in this position for 2 minutes now. We'll keep going. We'll keep going. So he's now been in this position for 3 whole minutes. And even though he's now starting to show a little bit of urgency to work through this position, he still hasn't really made any ground in in actually breaking Costa's grip and getting the fight back to the middle of the octagon. So he's been in this position for 3 minutes, just like he hesitated for too long to work through the position where Carl Nelson had his back. We're seeing the same self-destructive mentality here in this position. So we'll keep going. So he's now been in this position for 4 whole minutes. 4 minutes. He's just allowed Costa to hug him from back control. And then you can see Costa just spends the rest of the round. So Garcia spends pretty much the entire first round of that fight getting hugged up against the cage. So if we then start round 2, so you can see Costa gets taken down early in this round. You can see Garcia gets taken down in the round, reaps a single leg. Garcia hits the reversal, again goes Super Saiyan and just knocks Garcia out. Knocks Costa out. Sorry, my dogs are really distracting me. I'm getting my words mixed up. They're going absolutely mental at the trick-or-treaters. But you can see, Garcia just goes Super Saiyan, starts to Hulk out, starts to get crazy, smashes Costa, and gets a win in very, very violent fashion. After, again, a very slow start and making a lot of very basic errors on the ground. So another come-from-behind win there for Costa, turning... keep mixing my words up. Come-from-behind win for Garcia, making Costa try to fight the referee, which is never a good sign for brain health. So, the question now becomes, well, based on those 2 fights, that were pretty recent, Garcia is real bad on the ground. The camera doesn't lie, so to speak. So what are the chances that David Onama is the kind of guy to make him pay for that? Because Onama's a striker, right? Well, as we've already covered, you look at the granular stats from Onama's record, he does shoot a decent number of takedowns per fight. And his success rate might not be great. 2 out of 6, not great. 1 out of 6, even worse. 1 out of 3, not great. 3 out of 3, better. Right? But the fact is, Onama does try to grapple. The one thing I will say about Onama is that he's very predictable. So, you've got fighters, very famous fighters over the years. We've referenced GSP already in this breakdown video. But GSP was famous for using takedowns to steal rounds and put his stamp on rounds. Matt Hughes built a career off the same blueprint. Actually, it wasn't the same blueprint. Matt Hughes wrote the blueprint because he came along before GSP. But guys like Johnny Hendricks followed this blueprint to have very successful careers and become UFC champions as well. And you get guys like Onama that become very tactical, very strategic, and they try and follow this blueprint to win fights where they kind of try to keep things reasonably competitive on the feet with a minute or 2 left to go in the round, and then towards the end of the round they'll try and shoot a takedown and end the round in a dominant position to put their stamp on the round, right? Their cherry on top of the round. And you see Onama doing exactly the same thing. So if we just skip through, you can see this is the midway point of the round. So this is the business end of the round now. We know the scoring criteria states immediate impact outweighs cumulative effect. So we know that the next 2.5 minutes, the final 2.5 minutes of every round are going to be scored higher than the first 2.5 minutes of every round, which is why guys like GSP would try and steal rounds with takedowns, and that's exactly what Onama tries to do here. So in round 1, he just gets more aggressive towards the end of the round, and then with 50 seconds left to go in the round, to alleviate the pressure Chikadze is putting on him, he starts to work for a takedown. You can see he gets the body lock, drives Chikadze over to the cage, and obviously Onama is a very athletic, very strong, very physically imposing fighter. And we see some nice chain wrestling here. He shot a takedown, got to the body lock, didn't have too much success with it, walked Chikadze over to the cage, but look at this very, very nice outside trip to reap Chikadze's legs out from underneath him, fully committed to it. Got it straight into half guard. Very, very, very nice. 35 seconds left in the round. Ends the round in top position. So, remember what you've just seen. Striking, first half of the round. Try to end the round with a takedown. The pattern repeats. So we go into round 2. This is the midway point of the round, or we approach the midway point of the round, right? 3 minutes, 10 seconds left to go in the round when he shoots this takedown. Watch. Boom. Fully commits to it. Double leg. Gets Chikadze down. Again, straight into half guard, which is very, very nice. Now, Chikadze's takedown defense is obviously garbage. It's not good. But Garcia's doesn't look particularly good either. Even though the stat shows even though the stat shows he has 89% takedown defense. I think this stat is skewed by the number of half-assed takedown attempts Cortes-Acosta shot that Garcia kind of technically defended, but Costa didn't really fully commit to. In real terms, I think Garcia's takedown defense is pretty fucking bad. So anyway, we will skip through. You can see Onama inside control now. Goes the half guard, just beats up Chikadze, chips away at him, tries to tie the legs up Khabib style, does all kinds of things from top position. So we hit a takedown, 3 minutes, 10 seconds left to go in the round. Finally let Chikadze up right at the end of the round. But again, use the GSP blueprint of strike for the first half of the round, grapple the second half of the round to put his stamp on it. Can you guess what Onama tries to do in round 3? I bet you can. Let's skip to the midway point of the round. Like clockwork, here we go. So this is the midway point of the round, and he shot the first takedown of round 2 40 seconds before he shoots this one. It's about 3 minutes 10 seconds into round 2. Here, right at the midway point of the round, boom, double leg straight into Chikadze's guard, and then you can guess what happens. Spends the rest of the round chipping away at Chikadze. So what this fight shows is that there's a real willingness from David Onama to grapple in his fights, and he doesn't mind putting on a boring fight. He doesn't mind getting criticism from Uncle Dana. He doesn't mind the crowd booing and giving him Ric Flair woos and having the referee tell him, "Come on, David, you gotta work." It's my best Mark Goddard prediction. Onama is not a very good MMA grappler, but if Steve Garcia, you know, in a video game had fucking 20%, or, you know, if you imagine like FIFA or the UFC video game, right, stats are ranked out of 99. If Steve Garcia's MMA grappling stat was 20, but David Onama's grappling stat was 30, both of them fucking suck on the ground, but Onama still has a huge advantage because in percentage terms, his grappling stat is far higher than Garcia's. So they're both garbage on the ground, but that doesn't change the fact Onama has a huge advantage there, because Steve Garcia is like supersize McDonald's with XL fries and a fucking big old fucking Coke, this big garbage. He's proper big garbage, like big garbage as big as it gets on the ground. So that does make Onama's edge amplified. So that's the problem I've got with this fight. I think Garcia smokes Onama on the feet bad. I think Garcia outclasses Onama on the feet and most likely knocks him out. And I think he will probably neutralize the threat of Onama's grappling as well. Because the way I would look at it is, it's a 25-minute fight. We've seen Onama slow down in a couple of fights. We've spoken about which ones. Garcia's cardio looks very good. And Garcia being this bad on the ground makes no fucking sense to me at all. It just doesn't make sense. It's like, you know, when you're trying to solve a problem or solve a puzzle, right? And there's just fucking everything pointing to like one logical outcome, but you're seeing a different outcome and you just fucking can't work out what the solution to the problem is. Garcia is an enigma. He's an enigma which doesn't make sense. Doesn't make any fucking sense. He trains at a great gym and has done for a long time. A gym that over a very long period of time, over a 15-20 year period, has produced top tier grappler after top tier grappler. Right? He's trained at Jackson Wink for a very long time. He's 33 years old. He's got a bunch of experience, 23 pro fights, but his MMA grappling is like he's had 3 fights and he's 19 years old. He fights like a teenage girl on the ground. The guy's he's bad. He's really bad. But it doesn't make sense because it doesn't align with his gym and his experience and all that kind of stuff. And another thing that doesn't make sense about Garcia is that when he actually makes that decision to go, and that could either be pivoting in the top position against Nelson or hitting a reversal on Cortes-Acosta, when he's then the aggressor in grappling positions, like smashing either of them from top position or taking Costa's back, he looks great when he's the aggressor in grappling positions. So I'm left asking myself this question: is Garcia actually one of these guys that is just fucking really bad on the ground? Really bad? Or is he one of these guys that is so good that he has self-destructive tendencies, and we see this in all of professional sports, every sports, particularly sports where you see athletes in charge of their own destiny and going for single pursuits of success. Sports like golf, boxing, MMA, darts, we see it all the time. You can see, you can watch darts matches where 1 week you'll see a player that plays like the greatest player on earth, unstoppable, can't miss, absolutely incredible, pound for pound greatest of all time, right? You see this in darts quite commonly, actually, every month. And then the next week they could play the same guy and they'll perform worse than someone in your local pub. They won't be able to hit anything. They're just completely off their game. It's that self-destructive tendency, that self-destructive mentality that can self-sabotage fighters sometimes. And some of them, kind of sabotage their whole career and never really figure that out. Others just make life a little bit difficult for themselves in the fight, to just, suffer a little bit of adversity, and then they turn it on, and then they really perform to their best of their ability. Maybe Garcia's like that, but because so many of his fights have ended very quickly and we haven't seen him go deep very often, it's very difficult for us to say. So to summarize where I'm at betting this fight, I would not touch Onama, because you've got two strikers here. Garcia's a far better striker, and if Garcia gets his head in the game and shows more urgency to keep this fight on the feet, he's going to smoke Onama when it comes to striking. Do not bet Onama. Onama is a bad bet. Question is, you take Garcia. And I think with fights like this, you've really got to just consider the deal you're getting, right? So how do you cap Garcia? What chance do you give Garcia of winning this? Because the implied probability in his odds is currently around 57%. So to get any value here, you've got to give Garcia more than a 60% chance of winning. Can you do that? I think you can. I think it's fair to cap Garcia at 60%, but then that's only a 2.5% margin over the bookie, which is a bit shit. When you throw variance into the mix over the long term, with a sport like, or with the UFC, where you're only getting 12, 13 fights a week, you're not really getting the volume, over a very long period of time for a 2% edge to really mean a whole lot. So you really want to be capping Garcia at 65, 70% in order to get a good margin of value over the bookies and have a bet that I think would make a lot more sense from a money-making point of view. And so it becomes more difficult to cap Garcia in that 65 to 70% range, which is what I would want to do in order to bet him here. But he is a better striker. He does have better cardio. And he looked fucking great against Calvin Kattar. So anyway, guys, I haven't made my mind up on this one. I might still bet Garcia, but I'm thinking about it. There's a lot to consider. That's why the breakdown is so fucking long for this fight. But let me know what you think. Drop a post in the forum and let me know what you think. Come slide by our brand new chat room. And let me know what you think. We'll fire it up right now. Only literally launched today. Come in here, boys, and let me know what you think. Come slide in the MMA chat and let me know what you think. You could be the first to post in there. We literally just launched this today, a couple of hours ago. So come check it out. And if you don't want to check it out, let me know on YouTube who you're going to be betting. We'll quickly take a look at the props. I'd be amazed if this fight went to a decision. Unfortunately, the odds reflect that, with it being very steep favourite odds on fight to end inside the distance. The next most likely in terms of most likely outcomes for the props, I think most likely outcome is going to be Garcia by knockout or TKO. And if we take a look at the odds on that, that's about even money. So for me, those odds are absolutely terrible. Not that much better than his money line odds in percentage terms. So if you want to bet this fight, just take Garcia money line, and I hope you found that useful. Now let's break down the fight between Waldo Cortes-Acosta and Delija. So if we start off by taking a look at the odds, we can see that both guys are in that even money odds range, with Delija as the slight favourite at average odds of 1.75, which is going to be minus 134 for an implied probability of 57%. And Acosta is a 2.09 underdog, which is plus 109 for an implied probability of 48%. So if we look at the fighter comparison, we're not going to have too many stats for Delija because he's only had one fight in the UFC, which ended in just 2 minutes. But we can take a look at the tail of the tape. So they're both about the same age. They're the same height. We don't actually have the reach stat for Delija, but we do have the leg reach, which is about the same. Obviously, we don't have barely any stats for Delija because this is only his second fight in the UFC. So, in terms of how these two match up from a stylistic point of view, this fight is very going to much depend on which version of Delija we get, because if you go back and watch his UFC debut against Marcin Tybura, the fight only lasted 2 minutes, but Delija's boxing looked great. He was aggressive, took control center of the octagon, he looked really good on the front foot, fast hands, nice technical boxing, and Cortes-Acosta is a guy that doesn't have the best striking defense. We saw that in the Sergey Spivak fight where he got dinged multiple times against a striker that's quite low level in Spivak. And Cortes-Acosta for a heavyweight also doesn't have too much power in his hands. So with a guy like Delija that wants to come forward, wants to be the aggressor, wants to take control of the center of the octagon, Cortes-Acosta can struggle against fighters like that because he will struggle to back, someone like Delija up. And so this is one of those matchups where if Delija can fight for 3 rounds, how he fought for the first 2 minutes against Tybura, it's probably going to be a very easy fight for him. Now the problem is that even though he looked very good in that 2 minutes, it is only 2 minutes. And the last time we got a good look at him was all the way back in 2023 against Maurice Green, ex-UFC fighter, and this fight was over 2 years ago. You can see all of his fights since then have ended in round 1, 2 minutes, 40 seconds, just over 2 minutes. So we don't really know where Delija's at because we haven't really seen very much of him in the last 2 years. So last time we got a good look at him, like I say, was against Maurice Green, and he looked very average in the Maurice Green fight. It's available to watch online. It's on YouTube. I don't want to play any clips because it might result in the video getting copyright flagged. But I suggest if you're thinking of betting Delija this weekend, to go and watch this Maurice Green fight, because the way I look at it is, if he performs like he did against Maurice Green, Cortes-Acosta probably beats him very easily. And the reason being, against Maurice Green, he didn't have that fast technical boxing like we saw from him in the first 2 minutes against Tybura, and his volume was much lower. Against Tybura, he came forward on the front foot through a really high volume of strikes. He was the aggressor, and Tybura was just overwhelmed and couldn't back him up. And I could see the same thing happening to Cortes-Acosta, but he didn't look at all like that against Green. Low volume, flat, slow, and sluggish. So the question is, did Delija improve a lot in this 2-year period? And now he's able to fight at a high pace and be really technical with his good boxing for 15 minutes, in which case he would cause Cortes-Acosta big problems? Or did he just come out the gate hard, aggressive, looking to get Tybura out of there quickly, caught him cold, knocked him out, but his normal style is closer to what we saw the last time we got a look at him against Green, a good look at him against Green? It's difficult to say. My concern for Delija this weekend is that he did struggle a little bit against Maurice Green, when Maurice Green would kind of stay on the outside and use his length to chip away at Delija. Delija wasn't particularly great at landing on a moving target. Cortes-Acosta is a far better counter striker than Maurice Green, so Green could have a bit of success counter striking from the outside. Cortes-Acosta can have a lot more success. So my lean on this one is going to be Delija. Give him the benefit of the doubt. Assume that he has improved a lot in the last 2 years. But if he fights like he did against Maurice Green, then I think Cortes-Acosta gets the win pretty easily. So hope you found that useful. Come to the chat room in the forum and let me know what you think, or leave a comment on YouTube if you're watching on there. And yeah, let's move on to the next one. Now let's break down a very interesting fight on this card in the even money odds range between Jeremiah Wells and Temba Gorimbo. So Gorimbo's the slight favourite, average odds around 1.73, which which is minus 137 for an implied probability of 58%. If we take a look at the odds on Wells, he's the underdog, 2.11 underdog, which is plus 111 for an implied probability of 47%. So let's bring up the fighter comparison. So we can see that Jeremiah Wells is getting very old for a welterweight. He's 39 years old now. Temba Gorimbo, 5 years younger. Statistically, the younger fighter wins around 65% of the time when there's a 5-year age gap in the fight. But these two guys are at the sweet spot where this age stat is starting to become really meaningful, because at 39 years old we're going to see big decline from Wells from fight to fight, whereas at 34 years old Gorimbo is right in his prime. So if you measured the stats over the long term, how often 34-year-olds beat 39-year-olds, I would imagine it would be far higher than that average of 65%, because that average includes situations where 30-year-olds fight 35-year-olds, 30-year-olds fight 25-year-olds. You get what I'm saying. We can also see that Gorimbo has a 4-inch height advantage and a 3-inch reach advantage as well. Although you can see by Jeremiah Wells' body type, while Gorimbo is longer and taller, Wells is an absolute tank who is very, very physically imposing. Let's take a look at the stats behind this one. So a lot of the stats favour Gorimbo. You can see that he lands 30% more strikes per minute. He's 18% more accurate, slightly better defensively. And what is very interesting is that even though Jeremiah Wells kind of has a base in wrestling, it's Gorimbo that is a lot more active. He actually shoots almost 2 takedowns on average more than Wells per fight, and I'm going to come on to why that is pretty significant when we get into how these two match up when it comes to grappling. But what we can see is that, you know, to be fair to Wells, still shoots an average of 3 takedowns per 15 minutes, which is a decent volume of takedowns to say the least. Both guys have pretty much the same takedown offense. They're both pretty difficult to take down. In terms of the strike distribution heat maps, you can see that Wells has got that big power. He wants to knock you out, so he very much focuses his efforts on punching you in the face. And you can see Gorimbo mixes it up a lot more, much more diverse range of strikes, and he goes to the body a lot. 26% of strikes to the body is above average, and it just shows Gorimbo's the more diverse, dynamic striker. And it's pretty big, because we know Wells is a guy that has a tendency to slow down in fights, so landing those body shots, it is going to be, you know, potentially a decent weapon for Mr. Gorimbo going into this fight. So how do these two match up from a stylistic point of view? Well, in terms of striking, it really is the volume and the technique of Gorimbo versus the power of Jeremiah Wells. If we look back at the stats kind of tell the story behind how these two match up stylistically, because you can see that Gorimbo lands a lot more strikes per minute, but you can see that Wells is a total headhunter. 91% of strikes targeted towards the head, and if you look at his record, he's got a few big knockout wins, one against Cortes-Acosta, one against Valle Alves. He does hit very hard. He does have major power, and Gorimbo can't match that power. He's more of a volume striker. If you look at Gorimbo's record, you know, far more of a decisionator. He's only got 1 win by knockout against Pete Rodriguez in sort of his last 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 fights. So yeah, Gorimbo much more of a grinder and weaponizes his cardio, his work rate, his output to kind of outpoint his opponents. So on the feet, if Gorimbo can avoid getting knocked out, he should be able to outstrike Jeremiah Wells by a wide margin. And one of the key characteristics we see of a fighter that is on a steep decline is that they become very gun shy and they struggle to pull the trigger. So you can kind of see that in Jeremiah Wells' last fight against Max Griffin, where he only shot 2 takedowns in the entire fight, which is a little bit strange because, you know, Max Griffin's 40 years old and doesn't have particularly good takedown defense yet. Wells didn't really try to take him down that much. Compare that to his previous 2 fights, in fact his previous 3 fights, where he shot 16 takedown attempts against Cortes-Acosta, 10 against Matt Semmelsberger, and 5 against Carlston Harris. Why is he only shooting 2 takedowns against Max Griffin in a fight that went the distance? Doesn't make any sense, and that probably cost him the win, as he lost a narrow split decision to Griffin. So I think where you're seeing, you know, less takedown attempts from Wells, 16, and then 10, and then 5, and then 2. It shows that as he's getting older, he is starting to become more passive, and he's not as aggressive as he was, just a few years ago. He made his debut back in 2021, and 4 years, a lot can change in 4 years at this stage in a fighter's career. Wells only would have been 35 years old back then, but between the age of 35 and 39, fighters can decline a lot, and I think these stats, sorry, this is significant strikes, not takedowns. Certainly a fight only lasts a minute and a half, so not long enough to shoot 16 takedowns, but still, with these 3 fights, you see my point: 10 takedowns, then 5, then 2. So yeah, it's one of those situations where Wells just isn't as aggressive as he used to be, and he headhunts a little now. Now, from a technical point of view, Wells is a far better MMA grappler than Gorimbo. He's got great takedown entries. He's difficult to hold down because he can hulk out, and he's got that incredible physicality to his ground game, and he's got a nasty submission game as well, nasty chokes. He's very powerful, very physically imposing on the ground. Gorimbo's ground game isn't great. He's very green. He is one of these guys that, even though he also shoots a lot of takedowns, you can see 8 against Sato, 6 against Brahimaj, and 9 against Nico Price. Gorimbo is one of these guys that is very raw, very green on the ground. Certainly not as physically imposing as Wells. Certainly not as technical on the ground as Wells. But Gorimbo has that high work rate. You can even see in his strikes 120 strikes against Price, 52 strikes against Brahimaj, 56 strikes against Takashi Sato. He's busy on the feet, he's busy on the ground. And so wherever this fight goes, Gorimbo is likely going to be outworking Wells. The problem is, Wells has got that crushing physicality on the ground to potentially overwhelm Gorimbo or put Gorimbo in bad positions that Gorimbo may not be able to defend himself in. Because if Wells gets on top of you, he does have good grappling control, does have a heavy top game. And on the feet, he's going to bring that big power. So this is one of those fights where I do lean towards Gorimbo just because he's got so many advantages. Higher volume of strikes, busier on the ground, 5 years younger, better cardio. Wells on a steep decline. So there's a lot of reasons to like Gorimbo in this even money odds range. But if I were to bet Gorimbo, it would purely be a data-based bet where I look at all the things that he's got going in his favour, and I say, you know what, Wells is 39 years old, he's declining, he's becoming more passive, more tentative. Gorimbo's going to be in his face, forcing him to work for 15 minutes. Old guys find ways to lose. There's a lot to like about Gorimbo on paper, and not very much like about Wells on paper. The thing is, fights aren't fought on paper, they're fought in the octagon, and if you actually tell me who is the better side to be on here based on the odds, I would probably say Wells. Because his odds are better than Gorimbo in a fight that I think is likely to be very competitive. So in a fight that could go either way, could be very competitive, I would usually just prefer to take the guy with the better odds, dog or pass situation. But when you look at it, 5 years younger, he's taller, he's longer, 30% more strikes per minute, he's busier with the takedowns, he's more accurate, 18% more accurate. And we know that Wells is becoming more and more and more passive every fight. So, yeah, one of those things, man. Just going to play the data on this one, lean the data and go towards Gorimbo. He is in the even money odds range, which does make him a tempting bet. Let me know what you think of this fight. Are you going to go with the tanky powerhouse, who's technically better on the ground, or are you going to go with all the stats and data that point towards Gorimbo? All the trends point towards Gorimbo. Even money odds range, implied probability of 58%. Let me know what you're going to do in the chat room, the forum, or in the YouTube comments if you're watching on the YouTubes. Now let's take a look into the over-under on this one. Where are we? I do think this fight is quite likely to go deep. I do think it's more likely this fight goes to a decision. If we take a look at their records, we can see that Jeremiah Wells frequently fights to a decision. So 2 of his last 3 have gone to a decision. This one almost went to a decision as well. And if we look at Gorimbo's record, decision. 3 of his last 5 have gone to a decision, but you can see plenty of decisions before that. So yes, this is one of those fights where I think it's more likely to go to a decision. Gorimbo's not particularly dangerous. Wells is, but Wells isn't as aggressive as he used to be, and Gorimbo is a tough fucker. In terms of props, the only one I would consider would be Gorimbo by decision, but I can't imagine the odds are going to be very good on that. Let's take a quick look. I really dislike this website, which is why I'm building our own comparison tool for our website. Gorimbo wins by decision. Yeah, odds aren't great. 3.40 plus 240. I would give that a miss. Don't get greedy. If you want to bet this fight, I would probably just take Gorimbo money line. So I hope you found that useful. Let's move on to the next one. Now let's break down the fight between Yadir Valle and Isaac Dulgarian. So if we start off by taking a look at the odds, we can see that Dulgarian is a pretty big favourite at average odds of about 1.40, which is minus 250 for an implied probability of 71%. And Yadir Valle is a 2.93 underdog, which is going to be plus 193 for an implied probability of 34%. This is a very, very good stylistic matchup for Dulgarian. I think he wins this pretty easily. And at the moment, I'm just kind of considering how I play Dulgarian, how I bet him, what I do with him. He's a very steep favourite, but I'd be very, very, very surprised if he were to lose this. And so, you know, I don't like to play really big favourites like this in MMA, but every once in a while a fight comes along where, unless something crazy happens, the favourite has almost no way to lose, and I do feel like that against Dulgarian. It would be very improbable if he were to lose this. So let's really dive into it. Obviously, Valle has only had one fight in the UFC, but he did go the distance on the Contender Series, and that Contender Series fight does contribute to his statistics. So we will go through them, but obviously a smaller sample size of data for Valle. And he's also competed against a much lower level of opponent than Dulgarian. So both guys the same age, and you can see that roughly the same size. You know, it kind of balances out here, right? Yeah, pretty much the same size. In terms of their stats, it kind of comes out as what you'd expect. Valle's the striker, so naturally he lands a lot more strikes per minute. But Dulgarian is the grappler, so he is much more aggressive at going for the takedowns. You can see 67% takedown offense for Yadir Valle, but that's against a really low level of opponent. You can see that Dulgarian only bothers going to the head, whereas Valle mixes it up to the body and to the legs nicely. So this is a classic striker versus grappler matchup. And in order for Valle to win this, he's going to need to keep the fight standing, which is going to be an incredibly difficult thing to do if he hasn't improved exponentially since he fought Antonio Montero in his UFC, I guess not really a debut, it's on the Contender Series, but it is a fight in the Apex, so it's kind of in the same ballpark as what we're getting this weekend, with this weekend's card taking place in the Apex, right? It's kind of like an unofficial debut. That fight took place almost exactly a year ago. So it's not like Valle has had a lot of time to improve. Don't get me wrong. You know, he is only 28 years old. I'm sure he has improved a decent amount in the last year. But I wouldn't expect Valle to show up this weekend and look like a completely different human. And so in his fight on the Contender Series, he gave up some cheap takedowns. Gave up position on the ground a few times against a low-level grappler. And I can't help but feel when he gets in there with someone like Dulgarian, who is such a high-level grappler, so physically imposing, so technical, has crushing physicality, dangerous submission game. And what I really like about Dulgarian is that he's absolutely relentless. He sticks to you like glue. He spams takedowns. And he just looks to overwhelm you with a very high pace and very high pressure. He reminds me a bit of Gregor Gillespie. I mean, I think he's better than Gregor Gillespie, but he's got that style where he just looks to go in there and drown you in work. And it's very, very difficult to keep up with that unless you've got the technique and the cardio to match Dulgarian, which not many guys in the division will have. He's a nightmare for you. I know that, you know, he didn't pace himself particularly well against Christian Rodriguez, and he ended up taking the L. And I'm sure he'll learn from that. But at the same time, if you go back and watch that Christian Rodriguez fight, it was a very bad decision. and Dulgarian, won the first 2 rounds pretty clear. He didn't start to get really tired till around about the 8 or 9 minute mark, and by then I think he will have been so dominant over Del Valle that if he hasn't finished him, it would be very difficult for Del Valle to find a way to take a decision from Dulgarian. When you look at the stats for the Rodriguez fight, it kind of backs up what I was saying about how persistent and aggressive Dulgarian is. To shoot 16 takedowns in a 15-minute fight, it's well above average. He's averaging over 1 takedown per minute, which is quite absurd, really. That's getting into Davashvili levels of persistence, and for me that just speaks to how tough of a challenge Dulgarian is. Yes, there will be people talking shit about him and writing him off because how he faded against Rodriguez and lost a split decision, but you gotta remember that was only his second fight in the UFC. Still relatively young in his career. That would have only have been his 7th pro fight, and I'm very high on Dulgarian. I think he's going to bounce back strong, and I think he's a fucking nightmare for Yadir Del Valle. So if you look at Yadir Del Valle's body type, you can see he's quite big, quite muscular, and we know guys with this body type typically slow down. I wouldn't say that he's got bad cardio, but he did slow in his Contender Series fight, and so with Dulgarian putting an insane pace on him this weekend with his grappling, very likely that Del Valle will slow in this fight too, especially if he's underneath Dulgarian. And so in terms of striking, Del Valle, might be slightly more technical than Dulgarian, but I don't think Dulgarian's outgunned big time on the feet. Del Valle's striking's nice, but it's nothing too terrifying. I think Dulgarian will be able to handle himself just fine on the feet in those brief periods we see them on the feet before Dulgarian starts spamming takedowns again. So look, you guys know me, I don't like to bet big favourites in MMA, but I'd be very, very surprised if Dulgarian lost this, and I'm trying to think of a way to bet him which makes sense, because this is a ridiculously good stylistic matchup for him. I think he wins very, 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 very easily. So if we take a look at the over-under, we can see that the fight is in the even money odds range to go over 2.5 rounds, leaning more towards under 2.5 rounds, which is quite interesting because that's a big percentage difference from fight ends inside the distance to under 2.5 rounds. Usually those odds are in the same ballpark, but fight ends inside the distance is much worse odds than under 2.5 rounds, which suggests the bookies and the betting public think someone's going to tire out late and get stopped. Most likely Del Valle, to be honest with you. Do you know what? I think the most likely outcome is going to be Dulgarian wins inside the distance. I can't imagine the odds are going to be very good on that. Dulgarian wins inside the distance, yeah. Even money odds, very, very bad. If I were you and you want to bet this fight, I would just say find a way to bet Dulgarian. I may go 2 units on him and just bet him straight. There are a lot of other big favourites on this card, so I might parlay him with someone. I'll give it some thought. But yeah, Dulgarian should win this extremely easily. And yeah, let me know what you think in the forum and chat room or in the YouTube comments below. Help me grow my channel, get the algorithm firing. And yeah, let's move on to the next fight. Now let's break down the next fight on this card, which is going to be Charles Radtke versus Daniel Frunza. So if we start off by taking a look at the odds on this one, we can see that Radtke is a 1.59 favourite, which is going to be minus 169 for an implied probability of 63%. If we take a look at the odds on Frunza, he is a 2.37 underdog, which is going to be plus 137 for an implied probability of 42%. So again, this is going to be Frunza's second fight in the UFC. He did compete on the Contender Series, so we do have some stats for him from that fight, but he's only spent 8.5 minutes in the octagon. We don't have tons of data to work with. So if we go to the fighter comparison tool, you can see that Frunza is a bit younger, has a nice 4-inch height advantage, only a 1-inch reach advantage. We don't know what the leg reaches are for these two boys. And if we look at the stats, they're not too meaningful. Let's ignore the stats because obviously, Frunza hasn't spent long enough in the octagon to generate any meaningful level of stats for us to analyze this fight with. So this is a very good stylistic matchup for Radtke. I think he's better than Frunza everywhere. He's certainly the more technical striker. He certainly hits harder, and he is for sure the better MMA grappler. So Frunza is a little bit one-dimensional. He's really just a boxer and doesn't have too much power in his hands either. If you look at his record, he does have lots of finishes on his record, but they're against a very low level of opponent. Now, Radtke did get knocked out in his last fight against Mike Mallet, pretty brutally as well. We've also seen him knocked out against Carlos Prates. But to be fair to Radtke, fights against Prates and also Mike Mallet, they're tough fights in your early stage of your UFC career. And I think Radtke is one of those guys that will find a home in the welterweight division. And I think he is a lot better than people are giving him credit for. He's tough, he's aggressive, he hits hard, he's reasonably technical everywhere. I like how well-rounded he is, and he'll give a lot of guys a lot of problems. I think he's going to win this fight. Quite simply, I think he's better than Frunza everywhere. Throws a higher volume of strikes, hits harder, definitely the better MMA grappler. Both guys have got reasonably good cardio, so that shouldn't come into it. But Radtke's just the better fighter here. So at an implied probability of 63%, I think it's fair to cap him in the 70% odds range. If Frunza doesn't win by knockout, I'd be very surprised if you're able to outstrike Radtke, because if you look at his record, this fight against Cortes was, a year ago. How much could he really have improved since that fight? Probably not a whole lot. So, yeah, probably going to be betting Radtke this weekend, and I would be very surprised if he were to lose this. He's just 30 to 40% better than Frunza everywhere. So in terms of the over-under, both these guys are very aggressive. Neither of them like to take a backward step, but Frunza showed in his debut that he is a tough fucker, so it won't be easy to get him out of there. I actually quite like over 1.5 rounds on this fight, although Radtke does go headhunting and looking for the finish. Although Frunza's not an easy guy to knock out, so my lean would be on the over 1.5 rounds, but I probably won't bet that because I think these two boys are going to go to war, and we saw Frunza get rocked multiple times against Rhys McKee, and Radtke hits a hell of a lot harder than Rhys McKee. So unlikely this fight goes to a decision, but the odds reflect that, and as a result, that one is an easy pass when it comes to the over-under. So I hope you found that useful. Let me know what you think in the comments below, or on my website, on the chat room and the forum, which you can find by going to the community tab and clicking one of these. See you there. Now let's break down the fight between Alan Nascimento and Cody Durden. So if we start off by taking a look at the odds, we can see that Nascimento is a 1.34 favourite, which is minus 297 for an implied probability of 75%. And Durden is a 3.31 underdog, which is going to be plus 231 for an implied probability of 30%. So Durden is stepping up to take this fight on short notice. If he were coming into this fight on a full camp, I would be all over Durden at these odds, because I do think on a full camp he's a very bad stylistic matchup for Nascimento for the reasons I'll get into shortly. But we know that Durden does have a history of gassing out in fights, and we've seen him take short notice fights in the past and slow down. We know that he's not going to have the cardio to go hard for 3 rounds against Nascimento, coming on about 10 days notice. So because of that, I can't bet Durden, but I would not be touching Nascimento in this odds range, because this is a terrible stylistic matchup for him. And if Durden does come in better shape than we expect him to, and he can fight at a decent pace for 3 rounds, he could cause Nascimento big trouble. So let's look at the fighter comparison. So both guys the same age, and they're about the same size. Durden's a southpaw, and in terms of the stats, you can see Durden lands 30% more strikes per minute, which is a bit surprising. Nascimento, a decent amount accurate though. 45% accuracy for Durden. That's painfully bad, and perhaps one of the reasons why Durden's cardio is bad. They say the shots that miss are the ones that really tire you out, and that is a very, very low accuracy stat for Mr. Durden. In terms of the takedown attempts per 15 minutes, Durden comes from a wrestling background, so he's more aggressive at pursuing the takedown. He also has better takedown defense, which is not a surprise, because we know Nascimento has that base in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and a lot of the time doesn't even bother trying to stuff takedowns. He's a little bit like Mackenzie Dern. He's happy to flop to his back and play from guard, which is one of the reasons why if Durden were coming into this fight on a full camp, I would bet him. Now, in terms of how these two match up when it comes to striking, Nascimento is the more technical out of the two. Durden is sloppy and scrappy on the feet, but he is aggressive. He does throw a high volume of strikes. And Nascimento, one of these guys that is just going to chip away at you. He's not going to be able to match the volume or the aggression of Durden. And if we look at the fighter comparison, you can see, Durden lands 30% more strikes per minute. It's the accuracy of Nascimento that I think will be the difference. I think he'll be able to pick Durden off, land the cleaner, harder shots, do more damage. But Durden's game, he's tough, he's scrappy, and Nascimento can be a bit passive at times on the feet. So it's kind of tough to call on the feet because Durden has got the volume, Nascimento's got the technique, but on short notice, I would lean towards Nascimento just because Durden probably isn't going to be able to keep up that volume of strikes across the full 15-minute fight because he's likely to tire out and then his volume will dip and he'll become sloppier, which will make him more hittable and give Nascimento the edge when it comes to striking. He's got the superior technique and Nascimento has also got the superior gas tank as well. So striking, I give the edge to Nascimento. Now, when it comes to grappling, Durden has a big advantage here because Nascimento's style of MMA grappling is deeply flawed. Most of the time when you're on your back in MMA, you're in a losing position. There are certain exceptions to the rule. We saw Mackenzie Dern and Alexander Volkov win rounds off their back last week, but that's generally quite rare. And Nascimento, the way he just flops to his back, gives up cheap takedowns and just plays from his guard, 9 times out of 10, he's going to be losing rounds off his back. He's nowhere near as aggressive off his back as Mackenzie Dern, and a guy like Durden that comes from a wrestling background can just get the half guard, stay on top of Nascimento, and just smother him in pressure, lay and pray him, rack up points with grappling control. So I do give a big advantage to Durden on the ground. Having said that, he is coming in on about 10 days notice. We know he tends to slow down in fights, so whether he'll have the energy to compete with Nascimento on the ground, I'm not so sure. I think Durden will do very well on the ground early, but if Nascimento starts, trying to hit some reversals and sweeps in the second half of the fight, Durden probably won't have the energy to defend himself on the ground. But this fight is clearly dog or pass. Even on 10 days notice, I would still prefer to take Durden as a 3.31 underdog than Nascimento as a 1.34 favourite. Because if you bet $1,000 on Nascimento, you're only getting $340 back. If you bet $1,000 on Cody Durden, you're getting $2,331 back, which is a far better risk to reward ratio in a fight where Nascimento isn't very good. So in terms of the over-under on this one, I do think it's very likely to go deep. If we take a look at the records of both these guys, neither are particularly dangerous. You can see that Durden frequently fights to a decision. And if you look at Nascimento's record, he's also a decisionator as well, going to a decision 3 of his last 4, 4 of his last 6. So I do think it's much more likely this one will go to a decision, even with Durden coming in on short notice. But the odds reflect that over 1.5 rounds a bit steep. I wouldn't bet on fight goes to a decision or the over 2.5 rounds, just because obviously Durden coming in on 10 days notice might get tired late on and struggle to defend himself, and then if Nascimento's got that killer instinct, he could go for a choke and put Durden in a bad position, tap him out. Late on we've seen Durden finished past the second round in a few of his fights because he gasses out. It happened in his last fight, happened against Bruno Silva, happened against Tagir Ulanbekov. So yeah, I wouldn't be betting the fight to go to a decision, but I think it's more likely to go to a decision. So I hope you found that breakdown useful. Let me know what you think in the chat room and forum. Thank you very much for watching. Please check out my website, MMABettingTips.com. Join my live betting group. We make a profit on 73% a month. The membership will pay for itself. You'll absolutely love it. Till next time, I'll see you guys next week. Nice one, guys. Bye.